Good morning. My name is Valarie Kaur. I am a civil rights lawyer and activist, and I am so honored to share this stage with so many fierce and brave women here and also the fierce and brave women in the room. Thank you for being here. I want to begin by honoring the ancestors of this land, the Lenape people, their histories, their struggles, their resilience. And I ask you to think of an ancestor in your own life who makes you brave. A grandmother, a grandfather. Hold them in your heart as I tell you my story. A few months ago, my son was sitting on the shoulders of my father. They were at a concert in the park. Coming home, my son felt like he was on top of the world. He wanted to ride the ferry home across the marina. He's 4 years old. And so as they were waiting there for the boat, they heard an irate voice. And my father, ever trying to be helpful, started to intervene. A woman was arguing with the boat conductor. The woman spun around, took one look at my father, and said it. "Go back to the country you came from." My father is hard of hearing, and so my 4-year-old son had to tell my father what she said. My parents came home shaken, and I asked them, well, didn't anyone say anything? And they said, yes, there were a group of people watching us, listening, but they did nothing. They were bystanders. And that night I was putting my son to sleep, and I was stroking his long hair and kissing his cheek, and I asked him, where does he feel the sadness in his body? And he pointed here and here, and so I kissed these spots and asked him if it changed, and he said, yes, Mommy. And as he began to fall asleep, my mind began to race. And my fists began to clench, and my heart began to beat so fast. You see, I have been a civil rights activist since 9/11. I'm a lawyer, I'm a filmmaker, I'm an organizer, and yet for all of my tools, I cannot protect my own son from hate. And I began to think of the women I have worked with in my life. I began to think of the mother of Balbir Singh Sodhi, the first person killed in a hate crime after 9/11, and her pain and her resilience. And I began to think of Sunaina Dumala, the widow of Srinivas Kuchibhotla, the first person killed in a hate crime under the Trump administration, to the words, "Go back to your country," and I felt her pain and her resilience. And I began to think of Amrit, the granddaughter of Baba Punjab Singh, a Sikh grandfather and teacher who was shot in the mass shooting in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, paralyzed, unable to move or speak, lying in a hospital room for 7.5 years from the bullets that the white supremacists put in him. Baba Punjab Singh looks like my own grandfather. He died a few days ago. His funeral is tomorrow. You see, I am reckoning with the fact that we cannot protect our families from white supremacist violence in this time, because in this time, Sikh and Muslim Americans are still seen as terrorists, just as Black people are still seen as criminal, brown people still seen as illegal, queer and trans people seen as immoral, indigenous people seen as savage, women and girls seen as property, and when they fail to see our bodies as some mother's child, it becomes easier to ban us, to detain us, to deport us, to rape us, to concentrate us, to separate us from our families, to sacrifice us for the illusion of security. I am breathless. I want to ask you, do you find yourself breathless too? When you are holding someone who is struggling or suffering? Maybe just moving through this world and the body you occupy is enough to cause constriction in your chest. Maybe reading the news about the latest mass shooting or children caged at the border, or our government's failure to protect us from a public health crisis. I want to tell you that your breathlessness is not a sign of your weakness. Your breathlessness is a sign of your bravery. It means that you are awake to what's happening in the world right now. You see, at this very moment, we are seeing the rise of ethnic supremacist movements here in the United States, across Europe, in India, and around the world, propping up demagogues, mainstreaming nativism, undermining democracies, politicizing the very notion of truth. And here in the United States, our country is in the midst of a massive demographic transition. Within 25 years, the number of people of color will exceed the number of white people for the first time since colonization, and we are at a crossroads. Will we? Will we birth a nation that has never been on the face of the planet? A nation made up of all the people of the world, a nation that is truly multiracial, multi-faith, multicultural, multi-gendered, where power is shared and we strive to protect the dignity of every person? Or will we continue to descend into a sort of civil war? A power struggle with those who want to return America to a past where only a certain class of white people, white males, hold cultural, political, and economic dominion. The stakes become global when we think of climate change. You see, those same supremacist ideologies that justified colonialism, the rape and conquest of Black and brown people around the world, those same supremacist ideologies have given rise to industries that pillage the earth, poison the waters, and darken the skies. Global temperatures are rising, the storms are coming, the fires are raging, and our current leadership is doing nothing to stop it. Will we? Will we marshal the vision and the skill and the solidarity to solve this problem together? Or will we perish? The last time I have felt this breathless was on the birthing table. You see, in birthing labor, the final stage in labor is the most painful. It is called transition, but it feels like dying. How is it that this stage called transition, that feels like dying, is what precedes the birth of new life? And so I have been holding a question in my heart, a question I want to offer you all today. What if? What if the darkness in our country right now is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country still waiting to be born? What if the story of America is not one of linear progress, but a series of expansions and contractions, expansions and contractions? What if this story of America is one long labor? What if all of our ancestors are standing behind each of us now? Those who survived genocide and occupation, colonialism, political assault, sexual violence. What if they are whispering in our ear right now, you are brave. You are brave. What if this is our time of great transition? The midwife says to breathe and to push. Because if we don't breathe, we will die. If we don't push, we will die. And I have come here to ask you to breathe and push with me in this labor. Because this brings me to each of you. You are the culture workers. You are the change makers. You are the community leaders. You are the mothers and the fathers. You are the sisters and the brothers. You are the ones who are here because you believe it is important to be in charge of your own heart. And being in charge of your own heart means to protect your capacity to love. You are the midwives to our nation in this time of great transition. How will you show up to the labor? And how will you show up with love? You see, because I believe love is the only force that is strong enough and durable enough to keep us pushing into the fire. Love, not as a flood of feeling. Any of us who have cared for children or parents or friends, we know that love is more than a rush of feeling. Love is sweet labor, fierce, bloody, imperfect, life-giving. A choice we make again and again and again. And love, this kind of love is labor. It engages all of our emotions. It requires us to show up with an open heart. Joy is the gift of love. Grief is the price of love. Anger is the force that protects that which is loved. And when we feel that we have reached our limit, wonder is the act that returns us to love. I believe that when we love beyond what evolution requires, when we love beyond our own kin, our love becomes revolutionary. Revolutionary love is the choice to enter into labor for others who don't look like us, for even our opponents who hurt us, and for ourselves who we too often neglect. And if love is labor, that means that love can be taught, and love can be practiced, and love can be modeled. And so I want to leave you here today with 3 core practices of revolutionary love. Are you ready? The first practice, see no stranger. See no stranger. Who we see as one of us determines who we feel empathy for and compassion for, who we show up for in the streets and at the polls. Authoritarians win when they dehumanize entire groups of people and we let them, but love is a conscious act that begins in wonder. And there is no greater vehicle to bring us closer together than our stories. And so I have come to ask you, whose stories have you not yet heard because it's too hard? And who have you not yet grieved with? Because who you sit with and grieve with determines who you organize for, who you fight with. Maybe they're in your peripheral vision right now. Maybe you haven't quite faced them, but maybe it's time now. It's time now to be brave. It's time to go to the prison in your city. It's time to go to the border. It's time to go to the shelter. It's time to go to the people and do the ordinary thing that you do, to care. And it becomes extraordinary. It's how we fight for one another. How will you fight in this time? And what will you risk? How will you see no stranger so that the next time we hear the word sand nigger or suicide bomber or go back to your country, you will be there for us because you will see my son as your own. Second practice. Tend the wound. Tend the wound. It is very tempting to see our opponents as evil, but I have learned that there is no such thing as monsters in this world. There are only human beings who are wounded, human beings who do not know what else to do with their suffering, their insecurity, their blindness, or their greed than to hurt us, to pull the trigger or pass the policy or cast the vote that's aimed at us. But I've come to learn that when some of us begin to listen to their stories, beneath the sound bites and the slogans, I hear pain. I see the wound. In a few weeks, I'll be going back to the prison to meet again with Frank Roque, the man who killed Balbir Singh Sodhi, a man I considered uncle. I have been sitting with this white supremacist. I have been listening to him, and it's been so painful, but I see the grief and the rage that drive him. You see, loving our opponents is not just moral, it is strategic, it is pragmatic. And loving this man, I'm gaining critical information for how to change the cultural forces and the institutions of power that radicalize them. We need to reimagine our systems, not just remove bad actors. That's how we will prevent killers in the future. And so I ask you, who is your opponent right now? Can you see the wound in them? Can you imagine what the world might be like if they no longer felt threatened or had the power to hurt you? And if this question is too much, it's okay. It's okay. Your job is to tend to your own wounds. It took me 15 years to talk to my uncle's murderer. I needed 15 years to process my own grief and rage. If that's you right now, tend to your own wound. Let love in. Love yourself well, because that way you can let others do the labor of tending the wound of your opponents. That's why we are community. That's why we are movement. And that brings me to the third practice. Breathe and push. Breathe and push. Our social reformers through history, from Gandhi to King to Mandela, they taught us a lot about how to love others and how to love our opponents. They didn't teach at length about how to love ourselves. This is the feminist intervention. This is Black women leaders like Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde, who declare that caring for ourselves is not self-indulgence, but a form of political warfare. For too long have women, especially women of color, been told to suppress our grief, to suppress our rage in the name of love and forgiveness. No more. Our movements cannot happen over our backs or over our dead bodies. We need to be breathing and pushing in all of the labors of our lives. The labor of raising a family or making a life, or building a movement. And so I ask you, who are you breathing with? And how are you breathing? Are you breathing each day with the earth, with the sea, with the sky? Are you breathing with music and meditation and movement? Because when we breathe together, we let joy in. And joy returns us to everything that is good and beautiful and worth fighting for. How are you protecting your joy every day? Your joy is your greatest act of moral resistance. This morning is giving me so much joy and giving me energy for the struggle, and I am so grateful. Loving just ourselves. Loving just ourselves. Oh, that feels good, but it is escapism. Loving just our opponents, that is self-loathing. Loving just others and forgetting how to love our opponents and love ourselves, that is ineffective. We need all three practices in the labor of revolutionary love. And revolutionary love can only be practiced in community. You know, that night that I was putting my son to sleep after his first racial slur, my mind was racing. I had all of these thoughts. My heart was pounding, and I thought he was asleep. When suddenly, my son puts his ear on my mouth, and he sits up, and he says, "Mommy, I not hear you breathing." And I said, "Okay." And then he says, "Breathe and push, Mommy, just breathe and push." And I thought, oh my God, my son has become my midwife. We can all be midwives to each other. No matter how scary, no matter how hard, no matter how dark or how violent, we can hold each other close. We can breathe and push together. We are building a movement this year. We are building a movement of faith leaders and thought leaders and artists and activists committed to rising up with revolutionary love and practicing together. You see, I believe that revolutions happen not only in big public moments, but in the quiet places where groups of people come together in pockets like this to practice a new way of being. If you see yourself in this, I invite you to go to seenostranger.com. seenostranger.com. But however you choose to show up to the labor, I ask you to show up to the labor with love and hold on to the image of your ancestors behind you, whispering in your ear, "You are brave." For one day, we will be someone else's ancestors. And if we get this right, they will inherit not our fear, but our bravery born of joy. Thank you so much.